So hi everybody, my name's Dee Dee Vergados and welcome to In the Know Radio. I'm here today with Michael Ellner. Thanks for being here.
I'm delighted to be here.
Michael is dealing with anxiety and pain management and hypnosis. He's developed a process which he's actually written a book on called Quantum Focusing. So he's co-authored, several books. Do you want to share with us what those subjects are on?
Yes. First, pain management generally is code for giving people with pain drugs. And when you speak to pain management, it usually means management by a medical professional. I'm a supplement to that type of care, and I provide hypnotic relief. And basically what makes what we do acceptable is we don't deal with the pain itself, we deal with the reaction to the pain. So you might think that if we help people take the suffering out of their pain, which really improves people's quality of life, and in many cases actually relieves the pain itself. It's kind of amazing in a way. The brain trains itself to just reduce and reduce and reduce.
So can you explain how specifically hypnosis works with the brain to reduce?
Sure. There's a new field of medicine emerging called neuroplasticity. And neurologists all over the world are very excited because it was a paradigm shift. For a great deal of time, it was thought the brain was fixed. And neuroplasticity demonstrates that a human brain is biologically engineered to learn, change, and grow. And what specifically applies to hypnosis is the making of habits and the breaking of habits. And in the process of that, what you find is repetition is a very, very strong driving force in forming habits. And that being able to interrupt patterns is a very, very powerful way to make change. Now, people with pain, especially chronic pain, have to understand that they're not experiencing painful activity. They're not experiencing the nerve activity. They're experiencing a reaction to it in the brain. So that regardless of the source of pain, all pain is in the brain. All pain is perceptual. So the source of the pain may not be affected at all. But it's very usual for a client of ours to say, wow, the pain's still there, but it no longer disrupts my life. The pain's still there, but I can enjoy going back to work and enjoy playing with my grandchildren or enjoy doing this or enjoy doing that. So that what we do is we help people take the suffering out of pain. And the suffering, in my opinion, is optional. People can be taught to put that aside.
And that gives them relief.
Yes.
Okay. And your quantum focusing technique, tell us a little bit about that.
In the early 1980s, I organized wellness groups for people with AIDS. And the goal was, and I did this as service. This was not part of my hypnosis practice. I wanted to help a community in need. And I wanted to challenge the death sentence. And what I discovered with these people was they were experiencing extreme isolation. And they were dealing with the type of terror, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And I wanted,
the fear of dying.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, well, for many people, it was the fear of being exposed as a gay man. It was pulling people out of the closet, and there was a tremendous stigma. People were losing jobs, housing, relationships. People were being beaten up. So there was a great deal of fear. For a variety of reasons. And one of the reasons were people were afraid of dying. But you'd be amazed at how many people actually told me they were more afraid of being outed than they were of dying.
Really?
Yes.
Yeah. At that time, it was a much different time than it is now.
And for many people, their parents were elderly, and they felt that it would break their parents' heart.
Right.
You know, they didn't want to have their parents accept them. They didn't feel a need to put their parents in that situation. And this would change that. So it was a very difficult time to be a gay man, and it was especially difficult if you thought you might have AIDS or you were diagnosed with it. That diagnosis was an automatic death sentence. So quantum focusing was my brand of mindfulness meditation and self-hypnosis. And what I taught people to do was to break that cycle by practicing intentional relaxation several times a day for 3-4 minutes at a time. And this is consistent with neuroplasticity. The more you do something, the better your brain gets at doing it.
Right.
You know, they like to say that neurons that fire together wire together.
Sure.
So you're creating these neural networks. The opposite is true. If you break a pattern, those neural networks begin to unwind.
Mm-hmm.
This is equally important if you want to change habits. And the other thing is people were focusing their attention in ways that promoted disease. And I, in these groups, gave people an opportunity to focus their attention in ways that promote health, healing, well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what most people don't understand is each of us has an inner doctor or an inner physician. And that might be the most important doctor we ever deal with. And more times what happens is the big challenge is that their inner physician's hands are tied. He or she can't help them effectively because they're stressed. And when they're stressed and their body's in fight, flight, or freeze, it's not designed to rebalance and heal.
Sure.
It interferes with it directly.
So you have to get them relaxed first
Well,
and
you got to
foremost.
move them into rest and digest states and help them de-stress. And, you know, people in life-threatening situations or any major disease or any chronic situation have what I invented a term for, fun deficiency disorders.
Yes.
When you're having fun, your body is healing.
Right.
It's producing a cascade of chemicals that are really conducive to rebuilding.
But if you're caught in that fear, it's very difficult to imagine fun.
So quantum focusing was a way to help them imagine fun again, because that's an expectation and a belief.
Right.
You know, many people find that an extraordinary challenge brings out the best in them. But many people have conditioned themselves over a lifetime that everything that comes up is disturbing. In these groups, I like to take a lighthearted approach to serious healing. You know, they don't need seriosity. The last thing you need is seriosity and a health challenge.
Yes.
And when people give themselves permission to find some humor in it, things change. The healing starts as soon as you can laugh about the situation.
And how do you elicit that inner healer? Because I know with hypnosis you can. The body will tell you everything it needs to recover.
Well, I don't think the body actually does tell you, and I don't think it should
The
tell you.
the mind body.
I don't think we need to be told. The mind-body operates below conscious awareness. And I've studied over 100,000 people with AIDS and AIDS-related challenges. And as a hypnotist, as an NLP practitioner, my goal has always been to study the people who do the best, model the successful people.
Absolutely.
So I have a lot of experience with that. And what you find with the successful people, they never had a plan as how to do it.
Right.
They never were concerned about what it was the cause. They were concerned about living as fully as possible now and remissioning. I would say one of the most powerful healing agents is having a purposeful living.
Absolutely. Well, there's some research statistics done by Lawrence LaShawn, who he worked with cancer patients for 35 years, and 70% of them had lost their meaning in life, meaning they didn't know why they got up in the morning.
Yeah.
So that is fun deficiency, I think.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
The thrill was gone.
Yes,
It's very hard
exactly.
to generate energy for your future.
And you're healing.
Exactly. Well,
When your mind-body is in that state of, well, what's the point?
So I never really paid attention to anything other than motivating people to accept responsibility for their thoughts and feelings as it relates to their health. And once you become aware of that, you can begin to change it. So I could give you an example, and I'm
Sure.
taking a lighthearted approach. You know, some people experience everything that happens to them as if it's a disaster. So to exaggerate the point, you might think it's, "Ay!"
Yeah.
A little technical term.
Right.
"Ay!"
Yeah.
And then when they transition and they learn that, you know, you could have your life experiences so that you think,
Yeah.
and the journey for my clients is to have these "Oi" reactions transform to "Ah" reactions. And that liberates your inner healer.
No, yeah, it sounds
So do you see what I mean? Once you recognize the reaction, everything is painful, everything is stressing, everything is difficult. Well, that's not going to promote healing.
Yeah, it's the reaction rather than...
Yes.
Absolutely.
So the person reprograms themselves, and I'm guiding that process. So one of the Hope coaches that I've certified and trained, is guiding the process in a way that everything that really is meaningful is done by the person themselves. The idea is to create independence rather than dependency.
Sure.
It's just to give them a skill set and motivation.
And with those two things, they can be on their merry way.
Yes, and where we see this, if you study health, you find that the biggest population in need of our services are people with medically unexplained syndromes and symptoms.
Ah, so what have you seen with that?
So you'll see fibromyalgia, chronic fatigue, right? IBS. What we do is ideal for that. But then there's a crossover. And that crossover makes me question everything we hold true about medicine and healing and our understanding. So I'll give you an example. You have two sets of symptoms that are almost identical, IBS and IBD. IBD, they say we have a medical explanation. There's inflammation.
And IBD is the IBS, but with diarrhea, correct?
No. IBS means they can't explain it. It's medically, it's a syndrome.
Sorry.
Right? IBD is a disorder. So they say we know that it's a disorder because, but IBS has a diarrhea and a constipation or both.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But it's still S. So it's SD.
Okay.
SC, right? But it's still a syndrome. They don't know what causes it. But what I found is the same set of self-help exercises help people completely eliminate their IBS symptoms over time and greatly reduce their symptoms very quickly.
Okay, and it's just so when you say greatly, just so people have an idea of
Well,
how many sessions are you talking?
It depends on the individual. So we've had individuals who've had a complete remission after one session.
Wow.
And then we've had, on average, maybe 4 to 6 sessions.
That's
but keep in mind, the sessions are teaching people self-help skills, and then they have to practice these skills. So after a first session, they see a noticeable improvement. That gives them the motivation to continue. So now they practice over 30 days and they see a larger set of improvements. They continue to practice over 60 days. Now we're talking about learning how to relax intentionally 3 or 4 minutes at a time, several times a day. Our advice is to continue to do this the rest of your life.
Yeah.
And as it becomes a pattern, you start doing it automatically. You start doing it without having to allot time for it. You just begin automatically to de-stress.
It's unconscious, right.
So what we found is all these symptoms went into remission. But the same thing was true for people who had a disorder with the same set of symptoms. Okay. So here, we didn't say anything about inflammation. We're not medically qualified to treat anything. But doing the same set of exercise, their symptoms disappeared as well, whether the inflammation was affected or not.
Ah, I see. So what is it that first got you into hypnosis in the first place? Because you seem really passionate about it.
I got into hypnosis accidentally. I was a lousy magician.
Oh.
And,
so did you become a stage hypnotist first?
Well, I was like 11 and a half, 12, 13. My friends were budding magicians in that age group, and we were performing for family, friends, and school, that kind of, each other more than anything. So there's this group hang, and all my friends are practicing coin tricks and card tricks, and I'm beginning to think I'm retarded. And someone gave me a book on stage hypnosis, and with the suggestion, I know you're going to be good at this. And it was close enough to magic that I really embraced it, and I was good at it. So my friends and I continued to do this for about 3 years. And then as we got older, we discovered girls, we discovered rock and roll, we made other discoveries, and they got put on the back burner. And years later, I was in a loft, and a friend told me that her arthritic pain had reached the point that it was sucking the joy out of her life. Nothing that she did was helpful, and that she was thinking about suicide.
Oh, my.
And I said, I used to do hypnosis. Maybe that would help you. And she said, I'm desperate. I'll try anything. And the hypnosis did help her.
Oh, wow. So how did you help? Was that your first foray into pain?
Yes.
Pain reduction?
Yes. And when I think back, it was quite crude. But
it worked?
But it worked. And what happened is she began to push me in a very loving way. So she called me up and said, Michael, you can make a difference in people's lives. You could really, really improve the lives of people in need. What the hell are you doing on Wall Street? Oh,
you were on Wall Street until then.
Who knew?
Yeah.
So So in the beginning, I didn't take it seriously, but she continued to say it. And she'd say it among friends and publicly. Wherever I was, I felt I had to defend, like, leave me alone.
Apparently you did her a great service.
Yes,
so.
and I began to appreciate it more and more. And then she sent me a brochure. There was a training not far from where I lived, but in another state, and it said this person was retiring. This was their last organized training, with a little sticky note, and said, if you take this, I'm happy to pay for it. And I really didn't need her to pay for it, but that she was moved to make that offer, change my life.
Right.
And I never looked back. And then...
So you got off Wall Street and became a...
Yeah.
Yeah.
So then, interestingly enough, the AIDS crisis came on, and I kept hearing in the media, first the media misrepresented it in every major state where there were AIDS cases. So if you were in San Francisco, you were told you were the epicenter. If you were in LA, they told you the epicenter. If you were in Dallas, you were the epicenter. If you were in Miami, you were the epicenter.
You simply can't win.
I was in New York, they kept saying, we're the epicenter, and it's always fatal, always fatal, always fatal. And I didn't believe that. So I can't explain where it came from. It was kind of intuitive. But I thought to myself, if I could find a few survivors, I could challenge the death sentence, and that would be important to do.
Right.
So I went to all the existing AIDS organizations, which were gay. And some openly were gay, and others hid that they were gay. But there were these several gay organizations, and I wanted to volunteer. And they put me through their orientation. They were desperate for volunteers, and everybody was running away, and I was coming to them. So I thought that they were pretty open-minded about that. But I went through their orientations, and I thought they're well-intentioned, but they're programming people to get sick and die.
You could see that as a hypnotist.
I could see that as a hypnotist.
They were focusing on the wrong thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I was suggesting, hey, I'm not a healer, and I'm not making any promises, but there's a possibility you may not die.
And that brings up a good subject. Languaging is probably the most important thing when it comes to disease or pain. So can you explain a little bit to our audience about how you want to phrase things? For example, when you use, we were talking earlier on about a pain scale, you should use a comfort scale.
It makes sense to give people chances to express the type of pain they're experiencing. And the standard thing that's used everywhere is a pain scale, most commonly represented on a scale of 1 to 10, where's your pain? And the clients that I wind up in my office are 20. And they've been 20 for quite a long time. So they're dealing with learned helplessness. There are all these other things that lock them into that unwanted pattern, which has now become a habit, right? So I thought that one of the ways to challenge that and help doctors get the same information was to reverse the scale and make it a comfort. So that when you're looking for comfort, you tend to find what you're looking for. If you're looking for pain, that will amplify your pain. The goal is to relieve the pain, not to find it.
That makes sense. It's like telling somebody you have an itch. You have an itch. You have an itch. You have an itch. Right?
Exactly. So I wrote a book with Kelly Woods, who's another hypnotist, called Hope is Realistic, a physician's guide to helping patients take the suffering out of pain. It was featured at the major pain medical conference.
Oh, wonderful. So
it's an introduction. People, the more doctors that read it and become open-minded, the more effectively they'll help their patients. And I got to teach 40 hours of accredited continuing medical education, which a good part focused on communication. For example, how a doctor describes side effects can actually influence the type of side effects someone experiences.
Sure.
So on one hand, if you say, well, side effects are dry mouth, diarrhea, or death, chances are the person would have that. But by simply adding, but you probably won't experience any of this, and if you did, it would be very mild and we can manage it, chances are they would have little, if any, adverse effect.
Absolutely.
So yes, and what happens with pain is people are routinely told nothing can be done. Or worse, it's all in your head. Well, all pain is in the brain, if you have
Right,
one.
it's the interpretation, once again.
So what you find is if a doctor says to someone, nothing can be done, but I'll do everything I can to help you, that's a pardon. Nothing can be done is a death sentence. And even though the person's not making a guarantee, that willingness and I'll do everything I can to help you is a type of needed support.
Right.
And then you find disability and workman's comp. In order to qualify for disability or workman's comp, they sign off MMI, maximum medical improvement.
Which means?
Well, according to most people, it means I'll never get better. But in medical language, what it means is at this moment in time, they're not expecting an improvement and the person is qualified for benefits.
I understand.
But they're not saying it's over. They're just, and in order to give you benefits, they have to have that diagnosis. If they don't, you won't get benefits.
So it's a catch-22.
It's a catch-22.
Yeah.
The thing is many people take it literally. And that is a terrible stressor.
Because it's coming from the authority figure, a doctor. So, of course.
You know, it's not intended to have that impact, but it does.
I totally understand. And anxiety would seem to be a close friend to pain, I'm sure.
It's part of a vicious cycle where pain is involved. You know, they both can stand alone, but what you find is they feed off each other. If you have anxiety, it increases your stress. If it increases your stress, it increases your pain. If you have pain, it increases your anxiety, which increases your stress, which increases your pain. And that's what people have to understand. I earlier said, you don't experience the nerve activity. That information is processed before you have an experience, before you have a sensation. So when it's processed, what determines what you think are your beliefs, your expectation, your state of arousal, your stress level. All of these things can be modified.
And if you modify those, then the pain greatly decreases.
Yes, there's relief. So I could give you an example. I could confidently say if you spend an hour with me, and during the first 15 minutes, I help you relax, and I know how to do that.
Yes.
And now you're feeling more relaxed and more at ease, that we could expect a 25% reduction in your experience of pain at that moment. Now, when somebody notices that, you can say, well, now you have some evidence of how this works. And then, working with the person, you can use a number of strategies. I like to use combinations. So one, distraction. Anyone who's had pain will tell you, even the most severe extreme pain, there are ebbs and flows. We want to concentrate on creating more pain-free. Exactly. And what you find is one of the times that they are aware of, when they get involved in something, they have less pain.
Sure, because they're caught up in that moment, they're not thinking
they're
about it,
focusing on what they're doing rather than on the pain. And when they're focusing on the pain, it gets bigger. So one of the things that a hypnotist could do is help them distract themselves in ways that are healthy.
Right? So develop healthy distraction habits to take their mind off of it.
Another thing is you can tap into what happens when we feel great.
Right. So building that feeling of feeling great and kind of locking it in.
Yeah, so you would utilize in the privacy of their mind experiences that feel great. Great sex. Being loved, feeling loving, feeling smart, feeling appreciated, feeling competent. Get in touch with those memories, those feelings. All of them involve the chemicals we're looking to tap into. And then hypnotically triggering them.
Right.
So now when you said quantum focusing started out with a simple exercise that helped somebody relax automatically. The second step was to help them use imagery that helped them promote a positive mental attitude. And these people had positive thinking, which wasn't helping them and might have made things worse. And they didn't know the difference. So
what
I'll
is the
explain the
difference?
difference. Positive thinking is this idea of faking it. So the person is making affirmations and saying things that present in a way that creates a conflict. You know, I feel I'm getting better and I feel inside I'm dying. That message creates an inner conflict. It's not going to help you.
Yeah, because they don't believe it.
Yes, it has a destructive effect rather than a beneficial one.
Sure.
But if you teach people how to develop a sense of humor and really examine how they feel in a given moment, they often feel better than they're aware of. So, for example, you teach someone how, the big complaint of people with cancer and people with AIDS or people with MS or people with any kind of really chronic pain, fibromyalgia, is people always say, how do you feel? And that creates a cascade of distress. How the hell do you think I feel? I have AIDS. How do you think I feel? But actually, that's not how they feel. They're reacting to the question.
Right.
When they actually consider how they feel at that moment, they might feel okay at that moment. And that's what I want to focus their attention on. So that when they're in a life crisis, and you say, how do you feel? I want them to have a sense, I'm in great shape for the shape I'm in. I don't want them to be in denial.
Sure.
But I want them to begin to appreciate that even with this, there are days I could feel good. There are mornings I could wake up with energy.
And that gives hope.
And that gives hope, and that promotes healing.
Wonderful. And you do this all, it sounds integrative. You're teaching the mindfulness techniques. You're doing a little bit of hypnosis with it.
Yes.
You're disrupting their patterns, the pattern that their brains have learned to fire in.
Exactly. What I'm doing is I'm giving them this skill set that enables them to develop these skills for themselves. Now it's portable. They're not going to run out of a battery. The battery's not going to go dead. They're not going to leave it at home.
And when you were saying you use imagery, like how do you use imagery specifically?
Well, what I like to do is find out what floats a person's boat.
Okay.
So if a client says, Mike, I'm happiest when I'm sailing. My imagery would involve sailing. Someone says, I'm really, really, really comfortable when I listen to certain music. Well, the imagery would have them, in the center of a space. The speakers are perfect. The sound is delightful.
Yes.
They can feel the music. They can practically taste it. So the imagery would really be generated by a client.
Okay, and what would be the difference using it in hypnosis versus out of hypnosis, the imagery?
There may be no difference. I find that there's compelling evidence that you don't need conventional inductions. And I can tell you that experience.
Okay.
In the early 90s, I started to get a lot of attention when they acknowledged long-term AIDS survivors. So from the 80s to the 90s, no one ever talked about survivors.
Excuse me.
Bless you, always fatal, always fatal, right? No one was discussing. But in the early 90s, it was undeniable that some people were. So when they started identifying these guys and talking to them, they might have had a list of why they thought they were alive, but a common denominator was me. That crazy Michael Ellner, who said I didn't have to die. Now, in truth, I never said no one didn't have to die. We all have to die.
Right.
What I did say was AIDS wasn't an automatic death sentence. And that the idea that it was always fatal was ridiculous. And the way I backed that up was as I identified long-term survivors, even at the beginning of the crisis.
Right.
A lot of people don't realize AIDS had a life before it was called AIDS. So that in the late 70s, gay men were getting sick, and the same exact syndrome was called gay-related immune deficiency. Those diagnoses were the first automatic AIDS cases because the name was changed.
And did those people, when they weren't given a death sentence, did they survive?
Most of them didn't, but the fact that some of them did was enough to challenge always fatal.
Right.
Usually it was fatal.
So when the death sentence came along, because I remember that time.
Yes.
And it was amazing. It was just like the media made it so you didn't want to even touch somebody with AIDS.
Yes, and not only that, but healthy people who were never at risk for AIDS were sexually terrorized, and I spoke out against that. The people at risk had risks because of certain behaviors. But if you were a heterosexual and you weren't an IV drug user, and you weren't having sex with an IV drug user, the chances are you would never get AIDS if you had sex every other day with total strangers.
Right.
The number of people infected was 1 in 250. And they were in very, very isolated social health risk groups.
Okay.
There was very little chance of moving out of those groups. But you couldn't generate funding for dealing with it if it only affected gay men and IV drug users. So the government intentionally misled the public and said everyone's at risk. Well, that scared the bejeebies out of a lot of people.
So they could get their funding.
And they got their funding.
Oh. That's unfortunate.
Well, they would say they were trying to protect gay men, and that might have some truth. In other words, they were saying if it was identified as a gay problem, or if it was identified as a problem of drug users, no one would care. But not only that, but there'd be a lot of anti-gay violence.
Sure.
A lot of
so it wasn't the worst thing that happened, yeah.
So, But I don't think it's ever a good idea to lie to the public.
No, not really.
And they created a actually psychogenic cause of AIDS. There were people all over the country who were not at risk, who were insisting they were infected. People who have had hundreds of tests that were negative and still believe the tests are wrong and somehow they were effective. So people would come home, stop having relationships with their wives.
Wow.
People would suddenly stop shaving, stop eating, stop sleeping. And then they get sick. It's sort of self-fulfilling.
Sure.
But the reason is because people were saying, well, this is God's punishment. A lot of people had guilt about visiting a prostitute, having an affair, maybe having
being gay.
Experimenting. Well, see, this is the heterosexuals were developing
Oh,
this.
I see, yeah.
They were at the least risk. With the gay men, if you were a gay man and you tested positive and you didn't feel sick and you didn't expect to die, you were isolated in the community. You're in denial.
Right. And plus, nobody wanted to touch. I didn't even want to touch people, I remember. I used to work with many, many gay men. And one day I was sharing my ice cream cone. I found out later on he had AIDS. And I'm like, I wasn't that scared, but I did question it. I'm still here.
Yeah. So it was at a time where I started to get a lot of attention that was unexpected. All the work I did with AIDS was as a volunteer, and I wasn't looking for any kind of recognition. I was happy to do what I felt I could.
Sure.
And hearing people say this really helped was enough for me. But suddenly I was getting invited to radio interviews. And I did a lot of them on commercial-free radio, enough that people thought I had my own show. But when you go on these shows, as you know, they want you to talk about a number of subjects. If you always talked about the same thing, you'd be boring very quickly. Because I was a hypnotist, I could talk about all these applications. So I'd go on a show, and this is relevant to your question. And I'd say, this is how hypnosis can help you stop smoking. And I'd describe it. This is how hypnosis reduces pain. This is how hypnosis helps people lose weight. This is how hypnosis helps people overcome anxiety. Well, I get calls later. Hi, I heard your show, I lost 20 pounds. Hi, I heard your show, I quit smoking.
Wow,
Hi.
so you were giving them actual tools on the radio.
Yeah, I heard your show, and my pain really is cut down by 50%.
That's amazing.
I even had a guy come in with a bottle of champagne, and I did a show and we were talking about mind-body healing in general. And I said, one of the most inspirational historical events that I'm aware of is something called buying warts. Have you ever heard of that?
No.
All right. So once upon a time in our past, the clergy were the doctors of their day. If you had a medical problem, it was viewed as, spiritual.
In nature.
You went into a priest or a clergyman. Well, warts were very common on children's hands, and they developed a way to treat warts. This is the clergy.
Right.
So they would give a child a very small amount of money, and then they would color their warts with food coloring. And the child would be told, I've bought you warts, I will collect them tonight while you sleep. And the next morning, the kid would wake up and their warts were gone.
What? That's amazing.
So this is the power of suggestion, and that's
Sure.
all I describe. This guy shows up at my office, here's a bottle of champagne. Actually, the receptionist said, Michael, one of your clients is here. And I went in, I couldn't see my client. I went back to, no, show that guy. I said, that guy's not, I never seen him before.
Yeah.
Go over, I introduced myself. He says, oh man, I just wanted to say thank you. I woke up this morning, my warts were gone. So,
wow.
So I had
the power of suggestion over the radio.
Yeah. So I had this immediate thing that challenged all my beliefs about everything I had to do. Right? I didn't hypnotize any of them conventionally.
You just shifted their belief system.
Yeah. So
Amazing.
I never looked back. That was very liberating.
So what have you seen in terms of, and I don't even want to say using hypnosis at this point, using this combination of shifting people's beliefs, relaxation, what have you seen that you would call, or I guess if someone were watching that had a traditional belief system, would call a miracle? Like just a miracle transformation or an illness going away or...
Well, I've seen people who were diagnosed as terminal with cancer who outlived their doctors. I've seen people who were told that they had incurable diseases return to normalcy. Now, were they cured or not, I don't know, but they had long-term remissions.
And give us an example of some of those diseases.
Well, a lot of them were related to what was once called ARC. So I'll give you an example. And this might be really useful to help people understand. When a person was diagnosed with HIV, what I noticed was almost immediately they had a set of symptoms. And it seemed to me that it was much too quick to be the natural development of a viral infection. It would be sometimes 3 hours after. Now I'm having night sweats. Now I'm having diarrhea. Now I have low-grade fevers. Now I have flu-like symptoms. And they were told this was a precursor to AIDS. So they were given ARC diagnosis, AIDS-related complex.
Oh.
And in the beginning they were told you'll develop AIDS in 3 months. It didn't happen. You'll develop AIDS in 6 months. Didn't happen. You'll develop AIDS in 18 months. Didn't happen. But they never were told they wouldn't develop AIDS. And they would just do these exercises that I'm talking about, and all their symptoms went into remission. So my feeling was all of this stuff was related to the stress and anxiety created by a diagnosis. Now it's interesting because as the word of mouth got around, people with medically unexplained meetings showed up at our meetings. And they were apologetic. I don't have AIDS. I really apologize. There's nowhere for me to go. And I heard some powerful stuff is happening here. Can I come to this meeting? Maybe it'll help me. And the meeting was structured so you're welcome. God, you want to be with people with AIDS? Sit right there. Exactly what you were talking about. This was
Exactly.
And the same thing happened with people with cancer. There were a lot of AIDS-related cancer, so people knew that something was happening in these meetings. And so people with cancer started showing up. Well, what I noticed is if you have a diagnosis of fibromyalgia, IBS, chronic fatigue, there's an overlay of the same symptoms I described that was showing up with people with AIDS.
The low-grade fever.
The low-grade fever, extreme fatigue, aches and pains, diarrhea, maybe constipation. A number of people said they were having night sweats, mental fog. All of these things were being described with these people who were newly diagnosed HIV, and it had resolved. Right?
Right.
Well, the people in the meeting heard this. And I said, look, the only thing these people did was practice this intentional relaxation several times a day as I taught it. And then they were given the freedom to actually be innovative and develop their own stuff. I just gave them a foundation. All their symptoms went away. Maybe your symptoms will go away. What do you got to lose? Well, the same thing happened. So just that they were there to witness it for each other was a very powerful thing for everybody in the room, especially me.
Right.
Because I began to see that there are all of these common symptoms that are assigned to another cause, and I can't diagnose. I don't care about that. What I care about is what happens when you address the fundamental issues of relaxing and how you focus your attention. And it's real important to include the focus of your attention. Otherwise, it's just a cycle of relax, stress, relax, stress. We want to get out of that. We want to make relax the automatic reaction. And we see this, that some people are naturally resilient and some people fall apart. What's the difference?
It's their interpretation, just like pain.
Yes, exactly. So can you help somebody shift that? Yes, you can. So I can give you an example that I find amusing.
Okay.
I had a guy come in and he was an officer in the fire department. He had medals galore. This is a guy who risked his life on a daily basis, never had a problem. At a particular time, he was on a building, the roof collapsed, and he fell 2 stories. He had several injuries. But the most disturbing thing was he started having nightmares and fear of heights. Now, a fireman is very, very proud. If they ask for help within the system, that's the end of their career. They'll never get another promotion.
Sure.
Just requested psychological help is enough to stop whatever is going on. And they have too much pride to talk to each other. So really there's nowhere to go. Well, he started showing up in an emergency room with panic attacks. And the symptoms are very similar to a heart attack. So the first time you go into the emergency room and you say, I have chest pains and I can't breathe, you get immediate attention. It reached the point where he was there so often that they didn't even take him seriously. He'd come in, they wouldn't examine him. They said, look, It's stress. We've told you a dozen times. You don't have a heart attack. Your heart is healthy. And his doctor sent him to me. And he came in, he said, I don't think hypnosis will help me. And I said, well, we don't have to do hypnosis. I'm confident I can help you just talking to you. So he says, well, I'm really, really disturbed because I have all these physical symptoms and they're telling me it's all in my head. And I explained, well, all in your head can produce a whole range of physiological changes. And I showed him this little lemon trick. Mm-hmm. You give a person a lemon drop, you have them taste it. 10 minutes later, you have them imagine tasting it, and they can taste it. Well, that imagining produced a physiological change. They now released digestive juices and activated their taste buds. Right. That's an example, very simply, of how your imagination can do this. Well, your imagination can also produce all these symptoms of fight or flight that is so extreme, so intense, you're having a panic attack that feels like a heart attack. So he was more stressed by everybody telling him there's nothing wrong with him. How could there be nothing wrong with me?
Yeah.
And he says to me, how could there be nothing wrong with me? How could there be nothing wrong? My heart is beating out of my chest. I can't catch my breath. I feel lighthearted. I'm telling you there's something wrong. I said, hey, you never had an orgasm? He said, yeah. I said, did you call 911? He said, no, same symptoms. How come it wasn't disturbing? He thought about it. And I said, the next time you have these symptoms, you're going to remember how you feel when you have an orgasm. They're not going to upset you. And I said, the whole reason this gets out of hand is you get upset by your sensations. I said, and as soon as you relax, you're going to find that the symptoms reduce, and then over time they completely fade away. We're getting in the habit that you used to be able to jump on high things and do this and do that without thinking twice.
So how did he end up eventually?
And no longer panic attacks.
Ah, wonderful.
They went away. He had a few, but when he had them, he didn't take them seriously. Mm-hmm. Right? He was more now amused because he couldn't deny that I was right. His heart was beating out of his chest. He knew that. He told me that when he told his wife what I said, she thought it was really funny. Mm-hmm. And the fact that she thought it was funny, he started remembering. They started reminiscing about times where they both couldn't catch their breath. It kind of re-excited their sex lives. Because
Which gave him healthy panic attacks.
Yeah. Well, but that's the whole thing. There is no panic. Right? The panic is when it's unexpected. You don't know what the hell is going on. Here, you're fine with it.
Yeah.
Well, this is the art of what I do. Now, what you said about should you go to a hypnotist, I would say yes. Most hypnotists have the training and skills to apply all of this, and whether you use conventional hypnotic approaches or not, they have a tool set to do both. In some cases, the conventional hypnosis works more effectively because the person has beliefs and expectations.
Sure.
Other times, they're not necessary. I was lucky in a way, which in the beginning I didn't know it was luck, but people would show up in my office and say, my doctor said you were crazy, but he told me you were very effective in helping people with pain. Oh. And, really, did he? He told me never discuss vaccines with you. Never discuss AIDS with you. But he said nobody's better at helping people with pain. So that's what they were there for. So I would call the doctor a few weeks later and help the person with pain. So I'd appreciate it if you change that to he's eccentric. This would work better for us. But so on one hand, the doctor created an expectation that I'd help him, but on the other, they gave me a license to be myself.
Eccentric.
But I didn't have to pretend to be anything.
Right.
So somebody came in and I would say, I'm going to take a very lighthearted approach to this. I'm not being disrespectful. I'm not discounting your pain. This is the most effective way to help you. I wouldn't do it if I wasn't convinced that the most effective way to help you is take a lighthearted approach. And then suddenly I could get away with that.
Because you were eccentric.
Exactly. And that was freedom.
That's wonderful. Well, if you could leave our audience with just one thing that you'd like to gift them with about the power of our minds, what would you have to say?
I would say that people are unaware of how easy it is to develop learned helplessness and learned hopelessness. And that in life, when we're frustrated, when we're not operating effectively, very often we give up without realizing that we have. And that very often it's called secondary gain, which I think is insulting, or it's called resistance, which I think is equally insulting. And the thing between you and reaching your goals is you stop expecting to believe it at a core level. And if you think about all the things that you really accomplished, deep inside you, you were aligned physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually. There was this unity involved. And that when you get back to that unity, suddenly life changes and improves, because this is my catchphrase for all of you watching this: people who feel better heal better. You deserve to be healthy. You deserve to be happy. And even if it doesn't seem that way, life is meant to be pleasurable, satisfying, rewarding, exciting, fun. And I help people develop an attitude that's conducive to that fits that in. Healing is more effective when you're having fun. Life is more effective when you're enjoying what you're doing. So I think that you'll find that really can give you a space to grow.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for
Thank
being
you.
with us.